Hey, folks, thanks for joining us today to preview NCSL's annual legislative summit next week in Louisville. I'm Reed Wilson, the editor of Pluribus News, and as nerdy as this sounds, this is like my Super Bowl week. So, what better guest to have than Tim Story, the Chief Executive Officer of the National Conference of State Legislatures? And if I'm sticking with the Super Bowl metaphor, I'm not sure if that makes him the quarterback or the head coach or maybe the ref. But, Tim, thanks for being with us today.
Well, maybe I'm the commissioner of the NFL, I guess, because I can't pick a team, right? I can't be on one team or the other, but I do love the metaphor. It's my Super Bowl too, as the commissioner of the NFL, and so it's a busy week, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation, Reed, and it's so grateful for everything you do, and I mean that very sincerely. We are massive devotees of Pluribus, so it's really cool to be with you.
Well, I appreciate it. This is the first time NCSL is holding the legislative summit in Louisville since 2010. I've actually
Since
never been to
2010.
Louisville. So what do you remember about that summit? What's the coolest part of the city that we shouldn't miss?
Oh man, it's Churchill Downs. I mean, it's the social event. I mean, I can't lie to you. I don't remember. My guess is we were talking about state budgets and education finance, and because those are perennial issues at every summit. It's a special place. The legislative summit is over 5,000 attendees on average, and this one is going to be big. We've far exceeded our expectations. In the election years, we've got headwinds because there are primaries around when we normally meet. But it does not seem to have impacted this year. Our numbers are well past 5,000 total attendees. It's the largest gathering in the United States to talk about policy, where the focus is policy. Now, this is state policy, obviously not national or international, although there's a fair amount of that. But so going to Louisville is cool. We can only go to there's only about 25, 30 cities, if that can host an event this size. So we're a little bit limited in where we can go. Louisville's not like one of the biggest cities. It's not Chicago or Boston, Atlanta, but it's a great convention city. They've updated all the facilities since we were there. So one of the things I remember is that it was a little bit cramped at the time, but that will not be the case this time. So that's another memory. But it's leaning into the flavor of Louisville, Kentucky. They're excited to host. The Kentucky legislature has been just phenomenally awesome to work with. They're great, and so they're going to host. They know how to host an event slash party at occasion. There's the evening events. Let's not forget that the days are packed with content and substance, and then we'll close it out at Churchill Downs. Which, how cool is that?
That is very cool. We'll get to the policy in a second, but one other thing I want to acknowledge, this year kicks off NCSL's 50th anniversary celebration, and that's a big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal. Back in the 60s, there were three organizations that served legislators and legislative staff. And the leaders from those organizations just sort of realized that they needed to have a more unified voice, both in Washington and then how they coordinated across the states. And so they started conversations, frankly, like 65, 66. And they kind of went up and down, and then in the early 70s they were rekindled. Actually, the Rutgers, with Rosenthal and the Center for Government, I forget the exact name, Center for Politics, whatever it was. They did a study about a national legislative organization, and in 1973, 74. The conversations got serious, and they at a meeting in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in 1974, so 50 years ago. In the fall, the three organizations voted to consolidate and form NCSL. And so we came into being legally on January the 1st of 1975. A lot has changed since then. We have a headquarters. We're based in Denver, Colorado, with obviously an office in Washington as well. But the legislatures have changed dramatically. And this is a big theme for me is, how these institutions changed. The legislatures were emerging, and we can have a whole nother conversation about legislatures and evolution. I'm going to have to cut myself off because I could go on and on about this, but legislatures are very different. I think that's one thing that's exciting. And then what does legislature institution world look like in the next 50 years or the next 10 years, frankly? And it was so dynamic in the 70s and 80s. I mean, they were adding staff, they were building buildings, technology was coming in. I mean, it's so great to look at like the first magazine, and it literally talks about the computer is going to change legislatures and stuff like that. I mean, but then another thing I love about looking at those documents, those magazines from 1975, gun regulation is a big issue, abortion is a big issue, education funding is a big issue. I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's the same issues because they're always changing. The society's changing, states are changing. There's so many fun things about it. One of my favorite quotes, you'll appreciate this, Reed, is in the first magazine. There's a story about the metric system, and there's literally a line. I'll mostly get it right, that says adoption of the metric system is inevitable in the United States. So we didn't get everything right in those early articles.
No, that's okay. That's how it does.
So the metric system, it's inevitable. I don't know what they meant by inevitable. Maybe 100 years, 200 years. I don't know.
Well, hey, why not? It's right around the corner, right?
It doesn't feel inevitable right now, frankly, but we'll see.
So you talk about issues that they were talking about back then. Let's talk about something that that was not on the menu in the 70s. I mean, there are tons of really exceptional panels on the books for this week, but I'm really struck by the focus on artificial intelligence.
Yeah,
it's
right.
such a huge concern for lawmakers these days. I mean, what are you hearing from legislators about AI?
What I'm hearing is that they can't stop talking about it. How about that? I mean, it is, it's sort of the issue du jour. I will say, when you talk about what's going on in legislatures, X% of it is the same year after year after year after year after year. And then there are these issues that kind of come along because there's something going on in the country that needs to be addressed. The opioid crisis, if you recall, that was such a dominant issue for a number of years. And of course, now there's like almost like an echo thing on that. And we'll get into that. But there are these things that emerge where we need to deal with them. I don't know if you probably will agree with me on this, Reed, but what was it, 2 or 3 years ago, all we could talk about was crypto and NFTs. And, that really hasn't, I mean, there's been some regulation. I think it's still to come, but it was like, it sort of came and then it ebbed. Yeah. AI is one of those issues, but I don't think it's going to ebb. I think there's the distinction between what happened with crypto and NFTs and all that business. But it underlies everything. AI is the unofficial theme of this year's conference, right? We've never had a theme of a summit, and this may be the closest we've ever come, right? And there are other massive issues. Housing is a major issue, of course. What's happening to budgets now that the federal funding has started to dissipate, really just go end, and with all the post-COVID recovery money and that. So yeah, I would say it's the unofficial theme of this year's summit, and I would also say that it's happening in a way that we're still at the beginning. I'm not even sure we've finished the beginning. I mean, I'm not the expert in AI, but I kind of see it from that 20,000-foot level. And all the conversations I'm hearing, I was in DC last week with the big 7 directors, CEOs, the people like me with the governors and the mayors and counties and CSG and all those. So, it was a central conversation for us, and it was not just for our institutions, how do legislatures use AI, but also, of course, society on the private sector, as well as how governments use AI, and it underlies everything. And there's been some quick stuff like on campaigns and elections. That's where legislators, they live that, they know it, they see the potential for abuse and also the potential for good uses of AI in that. So yeah, it is absolutely going to be the center of conversation in many of these sessions, and I think it's going to be the center of conversation for a while to come, and probably because the technology itself is evolving so fast.
Yeah.
So I feel like, let's say I'm old enough, I can remember the internet beginning. Some people probably watching are like, what do you mean? There's always been an internet. Well, there was a time when there was no internet. We faxed things. I remember when the fax came in. I don't know if you're in that demographic with me, Reed, but Remember when the fax machine started? It was revolutionary. I mean, the fact you didn't have to put something in the mail was crazy. So then the internet and all this, and I guess what I'm trying to compare on these technological innovations and advancements into our society is that those happened over the course of years, really. I mean, they were sort of new and there were early adopters and cutting edge people. And man, AI, it was democratized on day one. Everybody, had it, and people on our staffs and everywhere, right? And we're talking about Gen AI and the way it's being used. We're at the very beginning of this, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So this is an issue we're going to be talking about for a long time. We're going to have a lot of expertise in Louisville to talk about, what we're seeing now, where it could go, where it will go, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. One of the things that we hear from legislators across the country is that they're doing AI regulation because they don't think Congress can or will. So another,
I mean, there's that. I mean, hopefully with this audience that goes without saying, I guess, but who knows what the political landscape looks like in DC, but after the election, and truly we don't, right? It's all very much evenly toss up, regardless of what poll you look at, both on Congress and in the White House. And so yeah, the states are going to absolutely lead on this. They already have. I mean, there already have been AI legislation on some of the lower hanging fruit you can get your head around, but the big stuff is going to happen in the states. Absolutely, we've seen it before on so many issues, and that's when Washington was able to function. And I have faith that Washington will come back to this at some point. That the federal government will on the policy front. There's still hope, regardless of which parties. I think there are great leaders in both parties who understand there are issues that have to be addressed, and you can't just constantly let these things go. So having said that, yeah, it's happening in the states. Not future tense, it's current tense happening.
Yeah. You mentioned the crypto mining as sort of the fad of the last couple of years. One interesting thing that I think we've seen is that the conversation around crypto mining has expanded into data centers. And I'm hearing a lot of interest from states that want to attract these big projects, but at the same time, they're worried that these things take just a staggering amount of energy. What are you hearing from lawmakers in that sort of crypto data center emerging space?
Well, I know it's cracked their consciousness as a major issue, right? So they've heard from all kinds of constituents, both their literal constituents, people who live in their districts, as well as like their corporate constituents, people who have to look at the big picture of energy supply in states X, Y, and Z, or in regionally, right? These are there's a part of me thinks if I didn't go into elections and redistricting for whatever reason, I would have gone into energy because I think it's just. It kind of does underlie everything, because if you don't have energy and there's of course there's environmental issues, there's infrastructure, there's transportation issues, there's workforce issues around this whole discussion of energy supply. We have an energy supply task force that's been going for a number of years because it's just that kind of thing. It's that kind of issue. So now you bring in this new wrinkle of the massive amount of energy needed to power AI as it comes on, and it feels inevitable. We'll see. We'll see what efficiencies are gained and how this works out. I'm not an expert in this, so I want to be clear about that. But I will say that energy supply it was a big issue before you layered on top the need to maybe fund this new driver of the U.S. economy, and it will continue to be a big issue. And then you got environmental issues that play into that, and so and you talk to any legislator, they're keenly aware of it. It's absolutely moved up on the list of priority issues that need attention. So yeah, that'll be something interesting to tune into in Louisville as well.
Yeah. Sticking with the energy point, then there's another panel on nuclear energy, and it seems like there's this renewed bipartisan interest in reviving a sector that, again, can both create a lot of jobs and a lot of clean energy. What do you see happening in the nuclear space?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like just me personally that nuclear's. I don't want to diminish it or in a way and say it's having a moment because it's bigger than that. I think. You've always heard most politicians, legislators, policymakers that our energy solution is an all of the above solution, right? Well, that sounds great, and there are pros and cons to every source of energy, and I think nuclear has evolved. I mean, it's been when was 3 Mile Island and my nuclear friends
79.
So that's we're that's almost 50 years ago, right? So much has changed in the technology, and it feels like there's just a real determined push to look at this as a clean source of energy, and as a way to do it that safe. Obviously the safety has changed so much, and how do you regulate it in a more 21st century way, I guess is the way to say that. So no, it's clear to me that the level of attention being paid to nuclear, and there's lots of sub elements when nuclear is an umbrella for other things that are going on, with compact nuclear and who knows with fusion, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, there's legitimate research going into nuclear fusion, which could, what a game changer. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that, Reed. It's a focus, and it's going to continue to be. This is not a moment. This is a shift in the conversation, from what I can tell.
Yeah. You mentioned the sort of the federal money going to states sort of drying up for COVID relief. But there's this other pot of federal money that we've been reporting a lot on, the billions of dollars in federal infrastructure funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law. I feel like we're just now seeing states, get a hold of that money and get the sort of shovels in the ground for these projects.
Yeah, right.
A big part of the whole conversation, though, is the evolution in the types of projects that states are funding. So, like, how do you see lawmakers handling all these federal dollars?
Well, I'm going to confess I don't have a great answer for you. I can't say specifically, so I'm not going to try to pretend that I can give you a very specific answer. But I do know legislators, and I know that legislators are, when you talk, there's 7,386 of them, but there's also 50 institutions plus the territories, and there's chambers. And what I can guarantee you is that there will be all of the above, right? When you look across the board at what legislatures are doing in that, it's not just going to be, concrete roads and building what we think of as the normal or the usual use of these funds. And I have seen some of the stories, I have seen what you're talking about, the creative use of these, and I think there's probably more willingness and interest to do that, to sort of think more future oriented about, and there's density, there's housing that also plays into it. So I think it's going to be a lot of creative uses of those funds, to be honest with you. And this is the beauty of the system, right? You got states that are, going to take, very progressive, not in the sense of like Democrat left progressive, but like, creative approaches, red states, blue states, both of them. And then there'll be some that will be very traditional, right? That will sort of follow the exact path you could predict of, we've got to put, 2 more lanes on this road, right? And so I think this is the beauty of putting this money out to the states and letting them look at the problems they have in their state and come up with solutions for that. So yeah, I mean, that's how I'd answer that, again, without being too specific. I have a lot of faith that this was I mean, if the federal government would do more of this, the old sort of Reagan block grant kinds of things, like let the states flourish. They know what they're doing. These are not, they're just so much more evolved in what they're able to do than maybe 50 years ago.
Yeah. So before you became CEO of NCSL, you ran the elections and redistricting, as you call it. And I know you're as much of a political junkie as I am. I thought there's a really interesting panel that caught my eye on new trends in campaigning. What do you think we'll hear there?
Well, one, I was struck by the fact that the political junkie didn't say, you've got Donna Brazile and Kellyanne Conway sitting down on the stage together. That session, which is one of our general sessions, and you know, two incredibly thoughtful people, by the way. I know that people have strong feelings on different sides about these individuals. So as the political junkie, I have a feeling you'll be at that session. It will be fascinating. But no, the one you're referring to is the campaign. What was it's the what's do you have the title? Did you
It's the new trends in campaigning.
new trends in campaigning? You know, we're not a political. NCSL is weird. We're not political, but of course we are, right? There are all of our members. Certainly on the legislator side, they're political creatures. They live in campaign and election world. So no, I think that session is you know, it's talking about how to connect with constituents in an era of big data and AI and all this. I mean, the legislative campaigns became sophisticated 20 years ago, I'd say. But you know, there was a time when they weren't very sophisticated, but now you see the same levels of targeting and analysis of where you need votes and I mean that is, man, that is light years past when I started studying how legislators got elected and how they came in. And it's top of the game now, and depending on the state, in some cases they're probably more sophisticated than what you even see in national campaigns. Looking at you, Florida, I mean, it's a very, you know, and not just Florida, but there are a lot of states where, you know, the legislative races are extremely sophisticated. So no, I think it's kind of what you would expect. It's how to communicate in a world of, you know, in a world of TikTok and Reels, where you know, how do you, you know, that landscape of how do you find and communicate with voters and get them out to the polls. It just changes, you know, maybe not every 4 years, but every 6.3 years on average. So you kind of always have to be working on it. And we're in an era of, you know, everybody's like, oh, I'm going to do social. I'm going to do social media. Well, that's it's easy to say that, but then you get into the subcategories of how you find and get people. And I don't pretend to be an expert in that either, but yeah, that's what they're going to be talking about. Um, it's like everything at the summit, Reed. You know, we're always trying to think like, you know, this is the national gathering. You can have experts in your states, but you get here, you want to sort of see what's happening on the front, you know, on the front edge on all of these issues, every one of them. So hopefully every session is, you know, not necessarily 101, you know, it's 201, 401, you know, what's happening. So regardless of how you come in the room, your background on the issue, you're going to walk out with some real good take home stuff that you can go back and use in your capital.
Yeah. So every year there's a panel on civility in what I think we can all acknowledge are increasingly partisan times. And it seems to me that legislatures are getting more and more infected by the partisanship that bogs down DC. But the legislators themselves that I talk to are really, they're trying to hold on to that civil discourse. How do you foster that? How do you support sort of effort to maintain civility, you know, at a time when the R's and D's are farther apart than they've ever been?
Well, so you know, the underlying premise of this is, you know, not necessarily empirical data. It's just sort of how you and I feel and how everybody feels about it. So I guess my spider sense, intuition, without, you know, I don't have a Geiger counter that can measure civility of the legislature. So it really is anecdotal. But I talked to a lot of legislators. I talked to a lot of legislative leaders, a lot of legislative staff who are in the middle of this, and you know, their perspective runs the gamut. I feel like maybe the worst has peaked, at least for now, and I think the pushback has taken hold. That, you know, they're probably, I don't know, 3, 4, maybe 10 years ago. You know, we're like, man, things are getting bad, and there have been efforts, you know, there've been funded efforts to push, you know, civility and that the notion of civility. And I'm starting to see some dividends of that. I tell you, every legislative leader, and we train them too, you know, like, you got to take down the temperature. It does no one any good to do that. But these are humans, you know, and they're going to lose their cool at times. And I think we also have to acknowledge that. But But I think the vast majority of them understand that serves nobody. I think they're getting a little more sophisticated about understanding, my entire Facebook feed says that, this person's evil, and they're like, but wait a minute, I know Representative X. They're not evil. That's a good person. They stand for something I disagree with. So I think they're getting better at sifting out the noise of the internet, I say the internet, social, all the sites they're on, whether it's Meta or Reels or TikTok, whatever. So I don't know. I'm a little more hopeful. And I see it. I see that there's been some progress, so to speak. And I think that people learn from some of the viral encounters that there are always going to be people on all sides of the political spectrum who maybe it serves their interest just to get a viral moment and do some fundraising. But I think there's more awareness of that now, that let's not just play into that. So I don't know. I think that I don't know that the vast majority of them have always been civil, right? And they've also, we have hammered home this message, like, you guys are in this ecosystem, the legislative session, where you're kind of in it together. Yeah, you got your different jerseys on. One team wears red, one team wears blue, and then the legislative staff are sort of also a critical part of this ecosystem. And outside of that half-mile bubble of the state capitol, people mostly aren't paying attention, and you got to recognize that you're kind of in this together, and you got to carry the institution forward to the next cohort, the next cohort, the next generation, the next generation. These are institutions that have been around, as we know, in North America for over 405 years. And in the, all the way back to the Icelandic Legislative Assembly in the 800s. So we would hope that this is a moment, and we've had a moment, and there are institution-minded people who are going to keep us grounded, take down the temperature, focus on the work. And the one thing, I mean, you listen to first day speeches and you listen to last day speeches, and they all do tend to have some of the same echoes of, we're doing this for our state. You're not doing this for your little band of like-minded people. At the end of the day, you're a representative of the state, not just your team, not just your district per se. And most all of them get that. And I think that's becoming more influential in how they think and how they approach each other.
Yeah. So I've been paging through the agenda in Louisville for a couple of days now because it's big and there's a lot of stuff to do. What are the other panels that I should put on my agenda? What are you most looking forward to this week?
Oh man, that's really hard for me. One, because I know what goes into putting those panels on, and it's a lot of thought and work by a whole lot of people on our team and in cooperation with other teams. So I'm reluctant to say this is the best session you got to go to, because I think they're all good, which is a chicken way out of saying that our staff has done an amazing job of putting together a program. What I'll do is I'll sort of cop out and say, go to the general sessions. We have put together, so we have these, 4 anchor general sessions where everybody shows up and we do some stuff. And man, we got 4 killer general sessions this year. I think they're all going to be, super solid. Definitely a triple, probably a home run on all of them. I'm pretty optimistic. So got a great AI discussion that's going to lead us off. Our neuroscientist, who's a friend who's spoken for at the summit, always popular, always provocative, makes you think about how we as individual humans and our neuroscience plays into everything we do, policymaking and getting along with our colleagues. Then Eric Bailey he's just a phenomenal public speaker trainer. He's going to be great. And then we'll close out with Kellyanne and Donna having I think a pretty civil and frank conversation about the political landscape. I mean, what a moment we're in. We can't ignore what's happening in the world outside the convention world, outside of Louisville. There's some. It's been quite a few weeks in American history. Most weeks, months, years get maybe nothing in the history books, maybe a sentence. But we've had 2 events in the last 2 weeks that are going to at least merit a few sentences in American history books in 50 and 100 years.
Yeah.
An attempted assassination on the candidate for the White House, a former president, and then the candidate from one of the two major parties withdrawing from the race that close to the. I mean, these are amazing times, especially for political folks like us, and so yeah, that'll be a great conversation. So go to the general sessions, go to the social hits. But the thing, the advice I give mostly is talk to people around you when you sit in the rooms. Like, hey, where are you from? What are you doing? What was the big issue in your session last year? Or if you're from the private sector, tell me about your thing. Be a person who asks questions and listens with open ears. There's so much to learn. It's invigorating to hear from your colleagues, and man, I've heard it a million times. Most legislators, if you haven't had the opportunity to go out and talk to a lot of other legislators, you just think that your state's the only one that knows how to run a legislature, and then you go and you're like, oh, wait a minute, you guys, you get paid how much? You guys, you're in session how long? That's crazy. And then you get into the subterranean stuff about like, well, how many votes does it take to get a bill out of committee? And you hear every bill in committee, you hear every bill on the floor, and it's just really exciting if you're willing to talk to the people around you on the shuttle bus to Churchill Downs, or when you get to the room 5 minutes before the session. And don't just hang out with the people from your state. Reach out and ask those other folks, like, hey, what's going on in your state? Tell me about yourself. Pretty cool.
Yeah, that's why we go, and that's why we love it. So
yeah.
The one thing you didn't mention, I can't help but notice the very spirited tasting and tour. It happens on Tuesday at 1 p.m. So that'll be an interesting afternoon for a lot of us, I think. But of course, Louisville is the heart of bourbon country. I mean, what's your favorite bourbon? What do you tell people to sample?
This is I'm going to be a heretic here. I don't like. I'm not a bourbon drinker, and how terrible is that to say? But I appreciate people who are sophisticated and can appreciate fine bourbon. I'm always so impressed with people who have that kind of palate. I killed my taste buds a long time ago so I'm a simple guy when it comes to libations, and I'm more just a beer guy. So so I can't weigh in on this debate. What I do know though is it's the best in the world, right? I mean, I know this for a fact. I know from friends who are bourbon aficionados, and so you can't go wrong. I have actually I went to Buffalo Trace and did their tour one time, and so I do appreciate that, man. The people who make the bourbon in Kentucky, it is a tradition that goes back, probably to the, and I grew up, as you may know, Reed, I grew up in the mountains of North Carolina. So I do appreciate the history of spirits in that part of the world, and it's going to be pretty cool, pretty special. Bourbon and horses and good people. That's what you're going to get at the summit, and a whole lot of content. So it's going to be super fun. Maybe I'll be won over. Maybe I'll have a shot or two of bourbon, and
you'll have to give them a try. So, all right. Sure. I know you're a busy guy in the weeks leading up to this mammoth summit, so we'll leave it there. Tim Storey is the chief executive of the National Conference of State Legislatures. Tim, thanks for your time. I'll see you in Louisville.
No, really appreciate it, Reed. We'll see you in Louisville.
All right. And to all of you watching, if you're planning to attend NCSL, I'll be on the ground with my colleagues Stephanie Aiken and Austin Jenkins. Please stop us in the halls and say hello. We'd love to meet you. Safe travels, and thanks everybody for being a part of the Pluribus News community.